There's never been such an event that's so much fun with so much dry material.
It's a blast.
You have to take economics out of the conference room and out of academia because economics is about the business of ordinary people's lives.
Good evening, everybody. It's fantastic to have you all here. Would you give a huge Kilconomics welcome to Mr. Dan Ariely, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello, hello. Thanks for this lovely introduction, although I do have to tell you that I've learned over the years that a key to a good talk is to have low expectations. It's also true for marriage. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about dishonesty. And to start thinking about dishonesty, how many people here have lied at least once in 2013? Okay. How about the last week? I'm not going to ask about the last hour. But there was this really interesting study in which they took two people who didn't know each other. They put them in the same room and said, please introduce yourself to the other person. Talk for 10 minutes. And at the end of the 10 minutes, they put them in a different room and said, did you lie in the last 10 minutes? And almost everybody said, no way. And then they said, well, luckily we taped everything you said. Let's play it back to you sentence by sentence and see whether after each sentence you lied or not. And on average, people admitted to lie between 2 and 3 times in 10 minutes. And when you think about it, we realize we lie a lot. Right? We lie a lot. At the same time, how many people here think of yourself in general terms as honest, wonderful people? Right? The same group. And this is the conundrum I want to talk about. How can it be that on one hand we realize we're dishonest, on the other hand we think of ourselves as good people? So before we go ahead and talk about dishonesty, I want to say some good things about dishonesty. There's a story in the Bible that God comes to Sarah and says, Sarah, you're going to have a son. And Sarah laughs. And the religious scholars have interpreted her laughter as saying, how can I have a son when my husband is so old? And God said, don't worry, you'll have a son. Then he goes to Abraham and said, Abraham, you're going to have a son. And Abraham says, did you tell Sarah? And God says, yes. And Abraham said, and what did Sarah said? And God lies. God said, Sarah said, how could she have a son when she is so old? And the religious scholars have wondered, how could God lie? And their conclusion was that it's okay to lie for peace at home. And I've talked to many religious scholars about this, and they're basically saying, look, there are many human values. Honesty is one of them, but not all human values are compatible all the time. And what do you do when human values collide? Does honesty win all the time? No. Peace at home sometimes should win. This is why we don't teach our kids, for example, that the correct answer to the question, honey, how do I look in that dress, is always the truth. Right? We realize that we want some kind of social lubricant in terms of people not telling us the perfect honest all the time. I mean, how many of you would want to be married to somebody who always told you the truth? Right? Not that appealing. So we recognize this. We recognize that some dishonesty is an important social mechanism. We teach our kids, to be polite, not to say some things, and so on. And then, of course, people become professionals, and in professional life, things are different. You might want your significant other to care about your emotion. You don't want your accountant to care about your emotions. Right? In the professional life, we do want people to behave differently, but we learn our lessons about how to behave in life in the social realm, and then we are somehow expected to do it differently in that other realm. So I mostly want today to tell you about experiments we've done on how people cheat and when they cheat more and when they cheat less. But before I do that, I want to tell you a couple of stories about big cheaters that I have met. So in addition to doing lab experiments on cheating, I also try to interview and have discussions with people who committed big crimes, accounting fraud, insider trading, doping in sports, all kinds of things. I just want to tell you about a couple of those. So one of the first guys I talked to, his name is Sam Antar. And Sam was brought up in a family that had these retail chain of electronics. They were selling VCRs and radios and TV, stuff like that. And when he was 12, he was brought to work for his cousin Eddie. His cousin Eddie was running this chain of stores. The chain was called Crazy Eddie's. This was in New York and New Jersey. Some of you might know about them. Anyway, at age 12, he starts to work for the family business, and he learns about the 3 rules of commerce. The first rule of commerce is that every time they put an ad in the paper, they put it for something really cheap, but when people come into the store, they try to divert them to buy something else, something that has higher margins for them. And they have a very systematic procedure for that. They approach by 3 different salespeople, everybody telling them what a crappy deal that particular thing was, and they get them to switch to something else. The second rule of commerce is that it's their money and it's not the government's money. No need to pay taxes, and they try to keep everything in cash, no receipts, nothing in the bank. And the third rule is that every winter, they take all the merchandise they couldn't get rid of, they put in this corner of the warehouse, they pretend the pipes above it broke, they take a hose, they wet the merchandise, and they submit an insurance claim. The insurance pays them. Sometimes they let them keep the merchandise for a very small fee, in which case they switch insurance company and wet the same merchandise again the next year. Anyway, he grows up in this environment, and when he gets to be 18, he goes to college. And what do you think he goes to study? Any guesses? Come on. Interesting. Accounting. Okay. He goes to study accounting. And after the second year of accounting school, he comes back to the family and he says, "We have been doing things the wrong way." He says, "We have been skimming. We've been taking an amount of money and not paying taxes. That's called skimming. We have been skimming." This, he says, is not right. He said, if you really want to get wealthy, we need to have an IPO. Now you can dump stock and get some real money. You know what is this skimming thing? So he said, okay, now to have a successful IPO, we want to show an increase in revenues. Now, how do companies show increase in revenues? For most companies, you work harder. You sell more, you show an increase in revenue. The Antar family has another approach, which is they cheat less every year. So they have a 4-year plan in which every year they cheat by 25% less. Until on the 4th year, they don't cheat at all. They show an increased amount in revenue. They have a very successful IPO. Over the next year, they dump $100 million worth of stocks. Okay. Up to this point in the discussion with Sam, the guy seems like the poster child for the Chicago School of Economics. The guy has no morals. He doesn't care. It's all about money. He doesn't care about customers, government, nothing. It's just about maximizing money. And then I asked him, and how did the family fall? I mean, most of the people ended up in jail. And here is where the picture turns around. Now he doesn't look so rational all of a sudden. So Eddie, his cousin, had a wife called Debbie. And behind her back, everybody called her Debbie 1. You see where this is going. He also had a mistress, also called Debbie, and everybody called her Debbie 2. Well, anyway, the Antar family was a hierarchical family, and Eddie's father was at the head of that family. And as Eddie sold $100 million worth of stocks, people stopped going to his father for advice. His father used to hold court. People would come to listen to him and pay respect. All of a sudden, everybody goes to where the $100 million went, and his father lost control. He tries to get control back, but he can't fight this amount of money. Anyway, one New Year Eve, he called Debbie 1 and gives her the address for Debbie 2's apartment. And she goes to her apartment, and Sam said that this is called in the family the New Year Massacre. Nobody died. Anyway, this is the first point in our 3-hour discussion by now that Sam looks morally disgusted. He looks at me and he says, there are some things you don't do. There are some lines you don't cross. You don't tell a wife about her husband's mistress. Everything else was fine. Customers, insurance company, taxes. This was a moral violation. And in fact, it was not just a moral violation for him, it was a moral violation of the whole family, because the family really got split over this. Half was with Eddie's father, half was offended together with Eddie, and each of the sides gave the FBI information about the other half, which eventually got to their demise. And Sam said that without that, he don't think they would have ever been caught. But that aspect of violation was so offensive to them that they basically gave the other half of the family up just for that. Now, there's lots of questions that we can ask about something like Sam. We can say, what can we expect for somebody who at age 12 gets into a family like this? And can we expect them to develop a moral fiber? But we can also ask ourselves whether we're all a little bit like Sam. And here's the thing. In the first part of the discussion with Sam, it seemed he has no morals. But that was not true. The guy was deeply moral, but only about a very small subset of areas in life. Within the family, his word was his word, his handshake was his handshake, his promise was his promise, and you don't tell a wife about her husband's mistress. The rest of the world he didn't care about. Right? And we can think about whether we have the same kind of things, where we take some aspects of life, maybe not as many as Sam, and we just don't care about them. So, for example, how many of you have illegally downloaded material on your computers? Come on, honesty. I guess some of you have not. You haven't figured out how to do it yet. And and from all the people who have illegal download material on your computer, how many of you do you feel guilty if the local newspaper tomorrow had an announcement that said that they found out that you had some illegal download music on your computer? Would you be embarrassed about this? Almost nobody does. Now, this is kind of like Sam's world, right? You've basically taken one behavior, which is illegal download, and you said, this is not a moral question. Right? Now, Sam has done it more, but I think we all do it to some degree. Another story I want to tell you is a story about actually a policeman. This was a policeman who was in charge of a murder investigation in Washington, D.C., around Washington, D.C. And it was about 2 years after this murder happened that he got a lead to a suspect. And he caught her, and he brought her in for interrogation. And after about 2 days, she admitted that she did it. But even with her admittance, the district attorney decided he did not have enough evidence for that and decided to let her go. And this guy was really obsessed by that, because he was a woman who admitted, and they let her go. Anyway, 4 years later, he's already working in a different county, but he has a weekend off. He drives back to the old county. He takes all the tapes and material, and he decides he's going to look at everything very carefully to prove that they have a case and to put her in jail for life. And he looks at the evidence, and he realizes that when the murder happened, she was 8 months pregnant. And there was no way that she was the one who did it. And he looks back, because the evidence, or the witness expert said there was a very small, skinny woman. So there was no chance it was her. It was clear it was not her. He looks back at the evidence, and he realizes that he got her to confess something she didn't do. And he realizes how the whole procedures for policemen for interrogation in the US are about getting people to have false confession. So he basically says, you're guilty. I know that. Now, if you don't cooperate, you'll get the chair. But if you cooperate, you might just get 30 years in jail. He said, and you like Chinese food, right? And she said, yes. He said, you like chicken more and shrimp? I said, I don't know, maybe. Oh, so you like shrimp? Anyway, there was some shrimp in the evidence. I mean, so the whole thing was about leading her along to admit something she didn't do. And he basically said that at the moment, he believed she was doing it, and he was not evil. But he basically got her to admit something she didn't do out of a desire to get out the truth. He kind of helped the truth come out, not the right truth, but a version of the truth. And he also said that he had tremendous pressure to basically find somebody guilty. And he said he didn't care if they were guilty at the end. He just had to get her off that murder investigation off his books. So they basically have accounting of how many cases they have that are unsolved, and they basically weigh on them. And people, it's their statistic, and if they can take a case and basically clear it up, all of a sudden things are better. Anyway, I've talked to many crooks, all kinds of people, but now I want to go back and I want to talk about little cheaters and all of us. So the standard view of dishonesty is the cost-benefit analysis. You walk by a grocery store and you say, how much money is in the till? What's the chance he'll catch me? How much time will I get in prison? And then you say, is this worth it or not? That's the standard approach that people do the cost-benefit calculation. And that's what's driving policy and all kinds of other decisions. But is that theory correct? Do people actually think about crime in cost-benefit analysis? So first of all, we can ask the introspection question. When was the last time you yourself thought about the cost-benefit analysis? You know, you must have gone to some friend's house for dinner, that maybe they invite you as a guest, and you went to the bathroom and they had these really new, nice hand towels, and your towels are a little old, and you know, you had your bag and you could have taken, and nobody would have caught you and nobody would have done anything. Have you thought about this? How many times have you been to a restaurant that had nicer cutlery than you have at home? Right? The reality is that we have lots of opportunities to take stuff and nobody would ever find out and we would not get punished, but we don't think about it. By the way, next time you go to a restaurant, now you'll think about it. So the introspection is that we don't actually think a lot in terms of cost-benefit analysis. Also in the US, we have the death penalty. There are some states that have the death penalty and some states that don't. And when you look at the crime rate for crimes that could get the death penalty, you don't see any difference between the states that have the death penalty and states that don't. And if people did the cost-benefit analysis, it would decrease crime rate to some degree. People say, oh yeah, but the death penalty not worth it. Turns out it has no effect on the crime rate. And then we can think about the experiments. So first of all, how do we measure dishonesty? We measure dishonesty in a very simple way. We take a sheet of paper with 20 simple math problems, and we tell people, I'll give you $1 per question you solve correctly. You have 5 minutes. I would pass, if you were on the experiment, I would pass the sheets of paper around. I would say, ready, set, turn the sheet over. You would turn the sheet over and you would start to work as fast as you can. At the end of the 5 minutes, I would say, please stop, put your pencil down, and count how many questions you got correctly. Now that you know how many questions you got correctly, and also how much money you deserve, take the sheet of paper, go to the back of the room and shred it. And once you did that, come back and tell me how many questions you got correctly. I'll pay you accordingly. People do this. They come in the basic experiment. They say they solve 6 problems. I pay them $6. They go home. What the people in the experiment don't know is that we played with a shredder. Talking about cheating. The shredder only shreds the sides of the page. So when you put it in, it vibrates, it shakes, it makes the right noise, but the main body of the page remains intact, and we can find out how many questions people really solve correctly. And what do we find? On average, people solve 4 and report to be solving 6. And by the way, where is this difference coming from? Is it coming from some big cheaters who cheat a lot and shift the mean? No. It comes from a ton of little cheaters. We've run this experiment so far on a little bit more than 40,000 people. I'll tell you about some of those experiments, many, many people. We've had about 20 people who cheated a lot. And together, they stole about $300 from us. We also had almost 30,000 people who cheated a little bit each, but together they stole about $60,000 from us. And I actually think this is not a bad analogy for the economy. You know, sometimes you have crooks, that's true, but lots of time you have people who just cheat a little bit, but because there are many of them and they do it every day, it accumulates to be a very, very high amount. Okay, so now we have a measure to how to measure the amount that people cheat. So we played with the economic model. What happens when we pay people more money per question? You would think people would cheat more, they don't. Lots of people cheat, just a little bit, but as the amount of money per question increases, people don't cheat more. What about the probability of being caught? Again, doesn't matter. So what's happening? On one hand, people cheat. We can't say that people are angels. On the other hand, people don't respond to the economic incentive. So what we thought is happening is that maybe people are trying to balance psychology and economics. Maybe on one hand, we want to look in the mirror and feel good about ourselves. We want to feel that we're good, honest, wonderful people. Have some ego utility from that, right? Kind of some personal happiness from our view of our own self. On the other hand, maybe we want to benefit from cheating. We want to... Now, you could say you can't have both. You're either honest or you're a cheater. Well, maybe you can. Maybe as long as we cheat just a little bit, we can benefit from cheating and still think of ourselves as good people, right? So somebody told me that in Ireland, it's kind of okay to underreport your income by 5%. That's kind of acceptable. 7 seems too much, 5 is perfectly acceptable. I'm not sure it's true, but that's what he said. I think the same thing goes with the speed limit, right? You can drive a little bit over this. A lot is terrible, but a little bit, it's okay. There's a range in which you think it's still okay. It's not, but we think it's still okay. So this idea is that it's all about rationalization. It's about how we can both cheat a little bit and think of ourselves as dishonest, having the cake and keeping the cake and eating it too, but we can only do a little bit of that. So let's think together. If it's all about rationalization, if it's all about weaving a tale, telling a story, trying to justify why this level of dishonesty is actually okay, what kind of things would help us rationalize higher level of dishonesty? What kind of things would increase the level of dishonesty that we're capable of doing because they would help us rationalize why this is actually okay? Give me some suggestions. Everybody else is doing it, right? That's a wonderful rationalization. So let me tell you an experiment we did on that. So in one experiment, we had a room full of people, and we did the same task I told you about before with 2 changes. The first change was we prepaid people. We gave people an envelope with all the money as if they solved all the problems, and we asked them at the end to give us back the money they did not make. That was the first change. The second change was that we hired an acting student, and we asked the acting student to sit in the front row, and 30 seconds into the experiment to raise their hand and say, "Excuse me, I solved everything, what do I do now?" Imagine you're in the experiment. You're still working on problem number 1. There is no question that this guy is cheating, but the experiment said you solved everything, you're free to go. And you see this person standing, taking their envelope with all the money, leaving nothing behind, and walking out of the room. What would you do? Lots more people cheat. But there are 2 interpretations here. One is about the cost-benefit analysis. One interpretation is say, look, you just proved to me that in this experiment I can cheat and get away with it. Nobody's chasing me. There's no downside consequences. The other possibility is that it's not about being chased or have a punishment. It's about being socially acceptable. So how do we separate those? We gave the student a different sweatshirt. And here's the story. We ran this experiment at a university called Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. Everybody was a Carnegie Mellon student, and that acting student was wearing a Carnegie Mellon outfit. In the second version of the experiment, he was wearing University of Pittsburgh sweatshirt. I'm not sure how it is the rivalry between universities here, right? So, I mean, think about something like football clubs, soccer clubs, right? I mean, you could say that somebody, if you prefer a particular team, I don't know what they are, but, A and B, we'll call them. If somebody is wearing... Now, what happens if you're a Carnegie Mellon student, you have a rivalry with University of Pittsburgh students, and all of a sudden you see a University of Pittsburgh student cheats in an egregious way? I'll give you a local example. You're sitting here, everybody's Irish, and there's a British guy who's cheating in a big way. You still learn that in this world you can cheat and get away with it, but it's the British who are doing it. Would that change your moral considerations? Well, Now people cheat much less. People say, oh, cheating is possible, but it's other people we don't like so much. Those are the people who are cheating. Let me do less. I'll give you another experiment we did on this. I owned a vending machine. People would put coins and get candy. And at some point, I rigged the vending machine. On the outside, it says 75 cents, but on the inside, it was set to have prices 0. So people would put the coins, they would press the button, the candy will come, and the money would come back. What do you think? And we sat on the side and watched. First of all, there was a big phone number to call in case something is wrong. How many people do you think called? 0, very right, okay. Now, what would you think, how people behaved? What was the most common behavior? Happy. Sorry? Happy. People were very happy. How many candies did people take? 2. The majority took either 3 or 4, nobody took 5. Nobody took 5. And I think it's because people kind of remember the case in which the vending machine took their money. And they were kind of just evening out the vending karma. That machine must have been a relative of this one. And the other thing that people did was to call friends to do the same thing. And again, you can see why, right? Because all of a sudden, you say, oh, if they're doing it as well, it's kind of more okay to do. So everybody else is doing it is a very powerful thing. What else? What else would change rationalization? You think the government is also doing it. So it doesn't have to be the government, but there's an evil entity who is doing that, right? So you're recovering back. So we did this study. We went in Boston to some coffee shops, and we said to people, hey, would you be willing to do a study for 5 minutes for $5? They said yes, and then we explained to them what the task was. It was a very boring task. They had to circle letters on a piece of paper for 5 minutes. And at the end of the 5 minutes, we came back and we said, thank you very much. Here's your $5. Please count it and sign a receipt for $5. But we actually gave them 9. And we left and we said, leave the receipt here. How many Bostonians do you think told us we overpaid them? Come on, these are your relatives. Slightly more than 50% gave us the money back. I'm sure in Ireland it would have been much higher. In another version of the experiment, when the research assistant explained to them what the task is, here is what you do. You circle. He stopped in the middle. He pretended somebody called him on his cell phone. He picked up his cell phone and he pretended to be talking to John for 12 seconds about meeting tonight for pizza. Hey, John, what's up? Pizza, my place. 12 seconds, putting the phone back, going right back, explaining to them what to do. Now, when he gave them the $9, how many people returned the money now? Only 14%. What happened was that people were pissed. Not very pissed, just a little pissed, right? Only 12 seconds. But that was enough to allow them to justify. He did something bad to me, I'm going to revenge back. Now, here's the sad thing. Sometimes he told people it was his money and his experiment, which meant that he was the offender, and if you revenged against him, the offender would suffer. Sometimes he said, I'm working for some professors, it's his money, it's his research. So now if you would take revenge, it wouldn't be just, because you would take revenge against me, the professor, when Daniel, the student who did it, was the one who offended them. People don't care. They get offended, it allows them to justify it, and they take it on whoever they see next. So, but the feeling of life has been bad to me, my turn is very right. We also showed in a recent paper, when we look at a broad range of social economic status, people who are relatively poor to people who are relatively wealthy, we don't find big differences in dishonesty. But when we find people who believed that their position in society is unjust, right? And think about like saying something like, you should have all been wealthier if your government was more responsible, Right? You really deserve that. You didn't deserve this government. You actually didn't choose for them. I mean, I basically can explain to you all kinds of things that you should have been better. That condition actually allows people to justify a higher level of cheating. So amount of money doesn't explain it, but the justification of where you are compared you think you should have been, that one does matter. What else do you think matter for justification? Practice. What do you mean by practice? As you do it more. We'll come back to this. Very good. Religion also. Let's come back to this in a second. Doesn't hurt anybody, yeah. That doesn't hurt anybody is very, very powerful. So in the last few years, every time I've gone to a restaurant, actually I haven't done it here, but every time I go to a restaurant, I ask the waiter, I said, look, is there a way to eat here and escape without paying? And I usually, have you tried this? No. And I usually tell them, look, I'm not really going to try it out. I'm just interested. Sometimes they ask me for my credit card up front. Usually they give me really good advice. There's a back alley, wait for a big party to come in. They have suggestions of how to do it. And then I say, and how often does it happen? And they say, almost never. Say, sometimes people who pay on credit card forget if they paid or not paid, but sometimes even if they left, they call back and said, I forgot to pay, here's my credit card. Almost never happened. And then you look at something like illegal downloads. What's the difference? Now, the truth is, in the US, illegal download is more dangerous than not paying in a restaurant. If you don't pay in a restaurant, they catch you, you can always say, I forgot. If you download stuff on your computer illegally and they catch you, you can't say, oh, I forgot, right? And you know that the industry is going to try and make an example of you. So here are two activities. One is dangerous, one is not. One is but the people are engaging in the dangerous one and not in the other one, because when somebody serves us in a restaurant, we see the marginal cost. We see somebody's time. We see the salad we ate, or whatever it is. We know that we consume something, and we would feel like crooks if we did it. On the internet, we can basically say nobody is hurting, right? There's all kinds of stories about this. So this idea is that as things become more removed, we don't see who is paying the cost, and because of that, we allow ourselves to rationalize to a higher degree and be less honest. Now, I'll tell you a little joke about this. Little Johnny comes home from school with a note from the teacher that said that little Johnny stole a pencil from the kid who's sitting next to him. And Johnny's father is just furious. And he said, Johnny, I'm embarrassed and humiliated. You never steal a pencil from the kid who's sitting next to you. It's just unheard of. You're grounded for 2 weeks, and just wait until your mother comes. And beside Johnny, he says, you know very well that if you need a pencil, all you need to do is to mention it. You could just say something, you can ask, and I can bring you dozens of pencils from the office. By the way, how many people have office supplies at home? And the people in the front row are raising their hand, the people in the back are kind of hiding a little bit in the darkness. Now, this is the idea that really when things become more distant, like a pencil, you can think about it differently, right? If you went to the store, if you went to the office and they had a petty cash box and you took 50 cents, you would feel like a crook. If you took a pencil, not so much. If you took 50 cents and you went to buy a pencil, you would still feel like a crook. But the moment it's a pencil, you can tell yourself all kinds of stories. Well, the workplace has it for us. It's actually beneficial for them. I'll take the pencil. I'll work harder at home, right? I'll print, whatever you... Anyway, so you can tell lots of stories about this. So we did 2 experiments on this. One was with golf. Anybody here plays golf? A few? Okay, so we asked 12,000 golf players questions about how they cheat and don't cheat in golf. So one question was, we said, imagine that a ball fell on the rough, not a good place, and you really, really wished it was 4 inches to the left. Would you pick it up and move it 4 inches? And people said, I can't imagine doing something like this. They said, by the fact that you're asking me this question, it shows me that you understand nothing about the game. You understand nothing about golf, what it means, the people who are playing it. Okay, never. Nobody does it. Okay, fine. What about kicking the ball a little bit? That's no problem. We do it all the time. What about hitting it with a club? That's even easier. The easiest, by the way, the easiest one is if you look up and then you kick a little bit. That's the easiest version. And I think you can all kind of feel the intuition, right? That if you picked it up and move it, it will be kind of hard to imagine the I mean, it's so deliberative. Kicking it a little bit, you can say, oh yeah, God still plays a little part in this. It could have been here as well. My leg could have been here before. I mean, there's all kinds of questions. In the other study I described to you with the simple math problems, we did it in the following way. In the regular condition, people got the sheets, shredded it, came to the experiment and said, I solved such and such number of problems, pay me. In another version of the experiment, they came after shredding it and they said, I solved X problems, give me X tokens. So when they looked into somebody in the eyes, they did not lie for money, they lied for tokens. Now, these people were paid in tokens, took the tokens, moved 12 feet to the side and changed them for money. So the lying was for tokens, but it became money very quickly. What happened? Our participants doubled their cheating. This, by the way, for me is one of the most worrisome experiments we've created. Why? Because if you think about these tokens, they were one step removed from money for just a few seconds. But as a society, we're moving away from monetary representation to more abstract representation. Cash, credit, stock options, derivative, dealing with people directly, dealing with people over great distances. Could it be that as we have less tangible, direct connection with the medium of exchange and with people, we feel more okay being dishonest and still thinking of ourselves as honest people? And I think the answer is probably yes, which is why the internet is such an interesting but also dangerous avenue from a moral perspective. Okay, so all this was about getting people to rationalize more and get people to cheat more. How could we get people to cheat less? So of course we could do the opposite of what we've talked about so far, right? Taking distances away and so on. But what else could we do? What else could we do to get people to cheat less? Observation, yes. Actually, it's really interesting because you don't need actual observation. There was a study in England in which they had this kitchen in which people could take tea and coffee, and they had an honor system in which they were asked to put a specific amount of money every time they took it. And above this little tea coffee corner, they had a big picture of flowers. And sometimes they replaced them with pictures of eyes. People left 3 times more money when there were eyes. Now, these were professors at the University of Newcastle. They're not idiots. They don't think, oh, somebody's really looking. They know it's a picture. They know it's a picture. And it's not so much about the act of looking. It's the act of self-reflection. So all of a sudden, you think about yourself. So I'll tell you a little joke on this. I'll give you the Jewish version of the joke. You can tell yourself a different one. A guy goes to the rabbi, and he said, Rabbi, you wouldn't believe what happened, but somebody stole my bicycle from synagogue. And the rabbi is shocked. He says, stealing your bicycle from synagogue? This is terrible. He said, I'll tell you what you do. Come to synagogue next time and sit in the front row. And as we go over the 10 Commandments, turn around and look at everybody in the eyes. And when we get to thou shalt not steal, see who can't look you straight, you'll know that's your thief. The guy is very excited, the rabbi is excited, he comes to synagogue, sits in the front row, turns around during the 10 Commandments. The rabbi is very anxious. He waits for him at the end of services. He said, so did it work? The guy said, like magic. He said, like a charm. He says, the moment we got to thou shalt not commit adultery, I remembered where I left my bike. So, you're probably wondering, what's the experiment? So this connects to your point about religion. We went to UCLA, California, and we asked people to try and recall the 10 Commandments. By the way, how many of them do you think recalled all 10 Commandments? 0. And quite a few of them invented new interesting... Anyway, after they tried to recall the 10 Commandments, we gave them the same task. We tempted them to be dishonest. Nobody was dishonest. It wasn't as if the more religious people, the one who remembered more commandments, didn't cheat, and the people who didn't know any of the commandments cheated more. Nobody cheated across the board. So we took it to the next step, and we asked a group of self-declared atheists to swear on the Bible, and then we gave them a chance to cheat. Even these guys, no cheating whatsoever. So it's not so much about God, heaven, hell. It's about really thinking about your own moral structure, which the eyes can do, the Bible can do, all kinds of things like that. So the next thing we did was we said, okay, let's think about it. It's all about getting people to think in advance in the moral framework. So we went to the university, and in the university in the US, some universities have what's called an honor code. Do the universities here have an honor code? No. So, so an honor code basically says, here is what cheating entails, and you'll get expelled for it. And we did a study in which people signed the honor code. I understand that this short study falls under the honor code. We did it at MIT and at Yale. People signed it, did the test, no cheating whatsoever. And no cheating whatsoever despite the fact that neither MIT nor Yale have an honor code. So these are two universities that don't have an honor code, nevertheless it worked. Then we went to Princeton. Princeton is a university that has a very strong honor code. They take the freshmen, first-year students, and they teach them all about the honor code for a week. Discussion, lectures, how important it is. The a cappella group has a song about the honor code. It's an awful song, but still. So we waited 2 weeks after this crash course on morality, and we tested them with signing and without signing. Do you think they were any different than the MIT and Yale students? No. Now, the sad news is that 1 week-long crash course on morality doesn't seem to have any long-term effect. The good news is that reminding people about their own moral obligations or standards just before being tempted to being dishonest has a big effect on them. So, with this in mind, we did a study with a big insurance company. This is an insurance company that sends people a letter asking them how many miles they drove last year. Now, if you got one of those letters, do you want to increase the number or decrease it? You want to decrease it because your premium would get lower. So they gave us 20,000 letters. We took 10,000, kept them as it is. How many miles you drove, sign below. The other 10,000, we asked people to sign first and then write the number. What happened? The people who signed first reported to be driving 2,400 miles more, about 4,000 kilometers more than the people who signed later. So it means that signing evokes people's moral consideration, and then they become more honest. And by the way, it's kind of curious because in some sense we all know it, right? If you think about the court system, in the court system you go to the court and you swear before you give the testimony, right? Nobody would think it would make sense to finish somebody's testimony in court and in the end say, do you swear? It's over by then, right? But somehow when we do forms, we forgot about this. When we do forms, you write. At the end, you sign. It's over by that time. We really need to think about it in a different way. Okay, so what I've told you up to now is really about conflicts of interest. It's really about the fact that if life gives you pressure to see the world in a certain way, you'll be able to do it. And you know, this is something that every sports fan knows, right? If you go to a sports event of your team against the most arch rivalry opponent, and the referee calls a call against your team, you can't help but think the referee is evil, vicious, stupid, blind, something like that. You want to see life from one perspective, and you see it from that perspective. But let's think back for the financial crisis for a second. Imagine I took any of you and I put you in Wall Street in 2004, 2005. and I gave you a $5 million yearly bonus if you could only see mortgage-backed security as a good product, don't you think you would be able to see them as better than they are? And I'm not saying would you lie, would you think to yourself, oh, these are terrible, let me just tell somebody else that they're great. Wouldn't you actually convince yourself that they are better than they are? And what if there were multiple steps removed for money? And what if everybody else was doing it? And what if you had a theory to rationalize all of that, right? Now you can see why you can create a financial system with terrible incentives, and no matter who you put there, you'll have bad bad outcome. So, we have a tendency to look at the financial crisis and to point fingers at some particular individual and say, these are just bad people. And this is actually quite dangerous, because if you believe that, it means that as long as you replace those people with other people, everything will be solved. I don't think that's right. I think that as long as we have this unbelievably biased incentive structure, we will have bad outcomes, even if we put Mother Teresa there. For her, it might take a few more months. But bad incentives are bad for everyone. I want to tell you one personal story on conflicts of interest. So I was badly burned. I spent a long time in hospital. And about 4 years after I left hospital, I went back for a checkup. And the head of the burn department catches me. He says, Dan, I have a new fantastic treatment for you. Come with me to my office. I go to his office, and he says that when I shave, on the left side of my face I have stubble, little black dots. The right side of my face is burned, so there's no hair, there's no stubble. And what is he proposing to do? He's going to tattoo the right side of my face to equal the left side of my face. And he says, go home, tomorrow morning, wake up, shave, and come back, and I'll fix you and make you symmetrical. Anyway, I drive home, and I think to myself, what kind of shave should I aim for the symmetry? Like the morning shave, the afternoon shadow? What would maximize the hours of symmetry? I get to his office and I say, I'm not sure I want this. Can you show me some pictures of people you've done it before? He said, yes, we've done it to 2 people, and he shows me their picture. He couldn't show me the whole face. He just shows me pictures of their cheeks, and looks very nice. Cheeks with little black dots, perfectly as promised. And then I said, what happens when I grow older and my hair becomes white? He says, don't worry, we can laser it when the time comes. I said, I don't think it's for me. I said, I don't think it's for me. And then he says, Dan, what's wrong with you? He says, do you enjoy being non-symmetrical? Do you get some deprived pleasure from looking different? He said, do women feel sorry for you? And you get some other. Anyway, I was really kind of shocked by this pressure, so I left his office and I went to his deputy. I said, what's going on? So his deputy said, well, we had it on 2 people already, and we need the 3rd for an academic paper. And I'm kind of ideal, half the face burned, half not, like really good for the paper. Now, here's the thing. I lost half an eyebrow, among many other things, and this guy wanted to fix my half an eyebrow. And the truth is, I couldn't care less. So he wanted to operate me for this half an eyebrow. I said no. So then he said, what if you go to another operation, and during that time I'll also do the eyebrow? I said, fine, as long as it's not a special operation for that. I had about 30, I didn't want more. If you do it at the same time, fine. So I had a very complex operation on my hand, so he came at the same time, but the hand team took too much space. So the guy had to wait 8 hours, and then he started at about 8 p.m. to do my eyebrow. And you can't just take pieces of hair and transplant them. It doesn't work. So he took a Doppler machine. He tracked blood vessels all over my head. He found the blood vessel leading up to a piece of hair and the blood vessel leading down. He isolated them, redirected them, and gave me half an eyebrow that grows just like my hair. The guy was an and physician. He spent basically the whole night giving me half an eyebrow, something I didn't care about, but he did. And I can't think of him in anything but the most kind and wonderful terms. He died about 10 years ago, sadly. But I can't think of him in anything but as a wonderful, caring... He was my physician for 3 years. But nevertheless, At that moment, he wanted that paper out. And at that moment, he couldn't see beyond his conflicts of interest, right? And that was a huge, huge problem. And that, for me, is a good indication that you don't have to be a bad person to have conflicts of interest. You can be a fantastic, kind, wonderful human being. Conflicts of interest are a separate issue, and we should try to think about how we eradicate them for politics and from our own personal lives. By the way, here's a statistic. In the US, when you go to a dentist and they find a cavity in an x-ray, so that it's not that they poke, but it's an x-ray, they show a cavity, what's the chances that a second dentist will find the same cavity in the same tooth? It's about 50% in the US. I'm sure here it's much higher. But you know, you pay dentists to find cavities. And they find cavities, not in the same place, but they find them. Conflicts of interest are everywhere, and we really need to think about this. Okay, there are two more things I want to mention. The first thing is somebody mentioned here practice, like what happens to cheating over time. So we also did experiments in which we gave people hundreds of chances to cheat over time. And we basically found this following pattern. People cheat a little bit, like a little bit above random, kind of trying to balance, feeling good, cheating a little bit, feeling good. And then at some point, people switch and start cheating 100% of the time. Now, different people switch at different points, but lots of people have this switch pattern, moving from cheating a little bit to cheating a lot all of a sudden. Okay, so when we saw this pattern, we decided to call it the what the hell effect. Right? And the idea is that you think on yourself as in a categorical way. You're either good or bad. Now, you could be 92% good and you still think of yourself as good. But if you're 75% good, is it really worthwhile to move to 82? Not really. You might as well go all the way and enjoy it. So we thought, if there's something like the what the hell effect, why would people ever start behaving well? I mean, in a religious sense, if you think you're going to hell already, wouldn't you just enjoy it until you go? So, really, I mean, no offense to the Catholics. I know most of you are Catholics, but we thought about the Catholic confession, right? How many people here are Catholic? Just as a few. How many people grew up Catholic? That's usually different. Okay. So this is no offense to the Catholics in the audience, but we went to talk to real Catholics. We went to Italy. We went to talk. We went to talk to Italian priests, and we said, please explain to us the Catholic confession. From an economics perspective, if you can sin and get absolved, wouldn't you sin more? What? If you're trying to minimize time in purgatory, wouldn't you cheat on the way to confession? It's kind of the optimal way. But the priest said no, and we came up with some theories. We said, maybe you think to yourself and say, oh, you know, I might have this crime, and I might get caught, and I might get punished, but for sure I'll have to talk to the priest, and this will be unpleasant. I'll have to do Hail Marys, some other thing. Not worth it. Like ex ante. We find no evidence for this. Another model is like the Ten Commandment experiment. You come out of confession, you feel good and wonderful and pure, and you don't want to spoil that. Yes, we have some evidence for that. For a few hours after confession, people behave better. But the thing that interests us the most was the what the hell effect. So we brought people back to the lab, and they cheated a little bit, and they start cheating a lot, and then we stop them. And we say, hey, we have a sheet of paper here. If you're interested, you can write some things you've done bad recently. And people wrote all kinds of things and shredded it, and we really didn't want to see what they wrote. They shredded it for real. And then we said, and here's another sheet of paper if you want to ask forgiveness from whatever deity you believe in. Please go ahead. And people did that. And after doing those two things, cheating drops down to the pre-what-the-hell level. Right? Which suggests that religion has some kind of interesting elements in terms of regulating behavior. And confession and the notion of opening new pages seem to be really quite interesting. Now, we're doing a study now when we're comparing the Catholic confession to the Jewish Day of Atonement. And if you think about it, those two religions came up with different mechanisms. Once in Judaism, it's once a year, right? Maybe not frequent enough. And then in Catholicism, because everybody can decide when they want to confess, it's not coordinated. Not everybody is doing it at the same time. So there's these two very different approaches. We're going to try and figure out if we can say who has the right mechanism. You can also think about the Truth and Reconciliation Act as a kind of a confession, right? Think of South Africa. How does a country move from an apartheid period to a post-apartheid period? Right? There's no smooth transition. But they stood up and they say, here are all the awful things we've done, and we're going to start fresh. And it doesn't erase apartheid, but it does create a point of starting something new. And then the last thing I want to tell you is about cultural differences. Just as anybody here grew up outside of Ireland here? Okay, raise your hands. Keep your hands up. Any of you think that people in your country of origin cheat less than the Irish? You in the back? You think yeah? Where are you from? Britain. Anybody else? Okay, I can't see above. I'm sorry if anybody's. So I grew up in Israel. So the first country I went to test was Israel. So how many of you think that Israelis cheat more than Americans on our test? Raise your hands. It's a very politically correct group, I think. Okay, I was sure that the Israelis would cheat more. They don't. Francesca Gino, my Italian collaborator, said, come to Italy, we'll show you. The Italians cheat just the same. We tried China, we tried Colombia, South America, we tried Germany, we just tried Portugal, we tried Canada, we tried the UK, they cheat just the same. We also tried Canada because the Canadians always think they're better than the Americans, they're not. We tried South Africa. Turkey. We don't find any differences. Now, in some sense, this is very puzzling because anybody who's been in other countries have seen cheating feels very different in different countries. There's also the Transparency International index that shows you that corruption index is very different in different places. So how come our results show no cultural difference where we have so much evidence for cultural differences? Here is what happens. Our tasks are general and abstract. They are detached from any cultural context. And because of that, they measure the basic human ability to cheat a little bit and rationalize. And from that perspective, we're all the same. This doesn't mean that culture doesn't matter. Culture does matter. It just matters on a domain-by-domain specific in the same way we talked about Sam. So culture can take a domain, like not paying your taxes, and say this is okay. Or culture can come and say, not paying for the bus is perfectly fine. Or downloading illegal software. Culture doesn't change the backbone of human reasoning. What it does, it changes how we think about domain per domain. In some countries, it's perfectly reasonable to pay a policeman a bribe if they catch you speeding. Right? That's just how you do business. And nobody's embarrassed about this in those countries. So culture does matter, but it matters in a domain-by-domain specific way. This is, by the way, why, for example, I talked to lots of people who doped in cycling, why it was so prevalent in cycling to dope that nobody thought of it as being bad. At the moment, in that community, they didn't think of it as bad. It was just the way you cycle. You do all kinds of things, including taking some EPO. We did find one cultural difference. When we do these experiments, we do them in one of two ways. We either go to universities, and we do it because we think that students are basically the same everywhere. Or we go to bars, because we think people in bars and pubs are the same everywhere. And when we go to bars, we also change the payment system. We basically change the payment such that every 4 questions people answer correctly, they get the amount of money equivalent to 1 glass of beer in that establishment. So beer become our international currency, right? How do you equate different countries? We use the beer index. Anyway, we ran one version of this in Washington, D.C., in a pub where congressional staffers hang out in. And we ran an equivalent study in New York City, where bankers hang out in. And this was the only place we found a cultural difference. So who do you think cheats more, the bankers or the politicians? Let's take a vote. How many people think it's the politician? Raise your hand. How many people think it's the bankers? Okay, so maybe like people think it's the 2-1, the politicians. The bankers were cheating twice as much. But I want to... Sorry? Not, I'm sure not, yeah. But two points are worthwhile considering. One is that cheating was in money, which was the domain of bankers more than politicians. And also these were congressional staffers, which means that they were very junior politicians with lots of room for growth. I told you a little bit about Catholicism and a little bit about Judaism, and you seem to be responsive to Catholic jokes, so let me try this one. A guy goes to confession, and he says, "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." And the father said, "What have you done, my son?" And he said, "I'm 70 years old, and I just had sex with two 25-year-old twins." And the priest is appalled, he's shocked. And he's saying, "I want you to say 1,000 times Hail Mary and walk around the church 1,000 times and give 1,000 euros to the church. And how long has it been since your last confession?" The guy said, "I've never been to confession." He said, "What? You're 70 years old and you've never been to confession? How can that be?" He says, "I'm Jewish." So the priest is saying, "If you're Jewish, what are you doing here and why are you telling me?" He's saying, "I'm telling everybody."